Hello, everyone, and welcome to Real Women, Real Purpose Talk Show. Is it live now, Jenny?
It's
Can
live.
you? Okay, fantastic. Welcome, everybody, to Real Women, Real Purpose Talk Show, live in the On Purpose Woman Global Community Facebook group. I am Kathryn Yarborough. I'm your host today, and I'm one of the two hosts of the Real Women, Real Purpose Talk Show. I'm here today with the other one, Jenny Robertson. Hello, Jenny.
Hello, Kathryn.
I am so delighted to be here with you because you know I absolutely love having conversations with you.
Yes.
And I'm going to tell everybody about that in just a moment. But for those of you who may not have read what we're talking about, we're going to be talking about freedom or fear. You get to choose. Now, if you don't know me, I have a other business called Manifesting Clients Academy, but I'm also very active in the On Purpose Woman global community that I love. I am the global facilitator of this community, and I am the creative director of the On Purpose Woman magazine. However, I'm here with a big, what do we call it? Big, I want to say big Juana, big cheese, the big person, the most important person, not the big person, but the most important person in the On Purpose Woman Global Community, Jenny Robertson, who is the founder of this community and the publisher of the On Purpose Woman magazine, and the person who just brought her vision together for the sake of all of us, continues 21 years later to keep showing up for all of us in this On Purpose Woman Global Community. So, are you ready to talk about freedom or fear?
I am. I am. Yeah.
hmm Well, so I'm going to ask you a question and we'll probably go back and forth a bit. But as I was thinking about this topic, what came to me is that often these days, or in the last, I don't know, probably 10 years, I've heard freedom or love, not freedom or love. I've heard fear or love,
Mhm.
fear or love. People say that an awful lot. You're either in fear or you're in love. But you wanted us to talk about fear or freedom.
Mhm.
And I wanted to get us started with why that? Why fear or freedom? What shows up for you around those two words?
Okay. Well, if you talk about the fear or love, I buy into that myself, that anytime we react, respond, have feelings, we're either coming from fear or love. And I actually challenged the people who came up with that, internally. I was going to find places where that just wasn't true years ago, and I couldn't, because fear is always couched in something else, that I can't be in love and fear at the same time. And so I think that's a separate kind of thing. When I talk about freedom or fear, I don't, we also can't coexist. They can't coexist. I can't have a sense of freedom and have be fearful at the same time. But those are more to me about actions and emotions in a way. So the love or fear is really just bottom line. I think there's a lot of things that we can't experience freedom if we're in it. Does that make sense?
A little bit. So bottom line is love or fear. So we're either in a consciousness of love, which is
Mhm.
connecting, or we're in a consciousness of fear, which is separating.
Right.
Okay. So that's just an overall way of being. And what you're suggesting is that freedom or fear has to do with doing things.
Well, the doing and also the emotion around it. So, for example, well, I don't think freedom and fear can live together, like I said. But when I was doing research for a workshop I did on this a number of years ago, I remember looking up the word fear in the dictionary, and there were 9 definitions of fear, and they were all emotion based, you know. And I looked up freedom, and there were 16 definitions of freedom, and not one was emotion based. And I thought that was interesting because I experience freedom as an emotion. You hear people say, I have a sense of freedom. I have to have a sense of freedom. That's an emotion. What does freedom feel like? And so for me, if I'm in fear, I know it doesn't feel like freedom because I'm constrained in every way. It's like I'm putting myself in a little prison.
Mhm.
And so that's really what I'm talking about, that we can either be mired in fear or we can have a sense of freedom. And it's not as simple as, just jumping from one to the other, that. So we'll talk more about that, I guess, when we do. But Yeah, does that clear it up a little bit?
Yes. So so let's talk a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about my experience with the desire to feel freedom, and because I know we talked about even before we were getting ready, when we were getting ready for this, the you said a lot of people who come to your workshops want to experience what you just described briefly, that sense of freedom.
Right.
And I remember years ago being in a workshop, it wasn't yours, but we were doing this deep breathing, and the person who was running the workshop asked us to answer the question, what do you want? What do you want? What do you want? What do you want? And then at the last time she said, okay, this is the last one. I mean, we went on for probably 10 minutes answering the question, what do you want? And doing all this breathing. And she said, okay, now what do you really want?
Mm.
And at that last bottom of the barrel of my wants was I wanted to feel free. I wanted to feel free. And in that sense, as I recollect that deep desire, which I think I've created a lot for myself since then, and I'm very grateful, is instead of feeling trapped, I wanted to feel free. And if I was aware enough, I probably would have said that that feeling of trapped was because I was fearful of something, but I haven't gone there before. What is your sense about all that? I mean, whether it's mine or somebody else's.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with that. I think that, and when I talk about a lot of the women who come to my workshops have this underlying just desire, deep desire for a sense of freedom. And when we want that, we want to feel free for whatever reasons. All of our reasons are different. We will unconsciously do whatever it takes to get there. But sometimes a sense of freedom is a false sense of freedom. And so I want to be really clear that, when we're in fear, we can do some things that will help us. We think we're feeling free. For example, if I fear getting on the scale because I think I've gained weight, that's a little, I don't think that's a huge fear. It's not a huge fear for me. Let's say, oh, I really don't want to get on because I don't want to know what it says. And I can all of a sudden switch that and go eat something I really, really, really want, because that scale is not going to dictate to me what I do. And I can all of a sudden feel a release from that and feel a bit free. Now that's going to come back. It's not a true sense of freedom. It's just a reaction to the fear, not a replacement of it. And so I think that this whole idea of freedom, again, it could be so different for so many of us. I'll give you an example from my life. When I was getting married the first time, my mother really thought I was getting a great catch. And it's my wedding is getting ready to start. Right before they're walking my mother down, to seat her, she leans in to give me a hug. And she whispers in my ear, honey, you're getting a really remarkable man. If anything goes wrong with this marriage, it will be your fault.
Wow.
Exactly.
Wow. What a message on your wedding day.
And she exits and goes down to sit down. Now, my dad didn't hear any of that. He's there with me to walk me down the aisle. My dad sensed something, not about that, but about me, I think. And my dad said, honey, this wedding's cost me a lot of money. You know that. But if you're not ready, if you're not sure this is right, we can turn right around right now and walk out the door. And years later, I thought that's so interesting that he said that, because I did mention it was my first husband, right?
That's right. You walk out the door years later. I get it.
And so that's an example of how our fears are implanted in us by other people, right? Most fears, I think, are implanted by other people. We can make up our own, but we usually have to have some community around it, have somebody agreeing with us to stay in that fear. So imagine a number of years later when I'm feeling like I've got to leave, I've got to get a divorce. What do you think was holding me there?
It's all your fault.
My mother. Nobody in my family's ever gotten divorced, blah, blah, blah. It wasn't even conscious at first. It was just, I can't do this. People are going to be so disappointed. That was a fear that was keeping me from being free in all kinds of ways, if you can imagine. Mm-hmm. So I think it's important, I don't think we have to go back and identify every fear or where it came from, but I think it's important to know the energy of it and where it came from in a way that, who it was coming from, and did it make sense, and is it the truth? So I think that's an important place to start sometimes, to say, why do I fear this? Because I was clear I needed to go, but yet I wouldn't. I wouldn't. I drug my feet. It took something bigger to finally get me, bigger than that, bigger than my mother's, whatever she was going to do with it. And she survived it. She lived through it.
Mhm. Well,
Yeah.
yeah, thank goodness. But it's interesting because you're saying in this example, and again, you said that everybody's fear and freedom looks a little different.
Mhm.
So just to pick this apart a little bit, in your experience, that fear was coming from disappointing other people. How are they going to respond to you? And I know that controls a lot of people, especially women. And in my recollection, with that feeling of being trapped, that I wanted freedom from feeling trapped. And
Yeah.
I'm trying, like, why did I experience myself as trapped? I really want to uncover, is there a fear there? Was I don't remember feeling, but maybe it was similar to yours, a sense of I've got to do what I've been trained to do. I've
Mhm.
got to be the person who thought, I think I am supposed to be, but it wasn't conscious. That piece was not conscious at that
Thing. It was,
point. It's almost like I think I worked through a lot at that, even at that stage, I had already worked through a lot of stuff. I'd already worked through the superficial stuff that had come in. And this was like way down in the core of my being that I still felt trapped. You
Mhm.
know, I it's interesting. I did this human design session with Christy Hoffman Sullivan, I think one of our On Purpose Woman global community members yesterday. And as she was sharing with me the information about my design, I realized how much I'd figured out over the years, because if I had met with her back then, she would have been giving me a lot of information that would have helped me feel free to be who I am. But at this stage, I think I figured out a lot because I started at least 10 years ago attempting to be free, or developing a freedom lifestyle. Anyway, I'm going down my own personal journey here and getting stuck in mired in our conversation
Yeah. See, there was a bigger piece
in
there.
my own doo-doo. Here,
Yeah.
say that again.
There was a bigger piece there for me than just disappointing others. My mother had implanted this idea that would be my fault. So I felt like I had to do everything I could to fix it. So I think that was an even bigger piece that was holding me there. Was like, oh, I can fix this because, what did I do? And, it was irrational. And as fears usually are, based in that irrationality. And I didn't know until years later that that's even probably was the trigger for that. When
Mhm.
I never forgot that conversation, but I didn't see the connection until I think I finally saw it when I was it wasn't years later when I actually picked up the phone to tell them I had left.
Yeah,
I didn't tell
yeah,
them I was leaving. I told them I left because
yeah.
I didn't want any interference there. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So if anyone's watching who wants to experience freedom versus fear, or whatever it looks like, let me say this. If you're watching and you have that experience of feeling not free yet, or wanting to experience more freedom, what's going on for you? Share in the comments below. The more we share, the more we talk about our own experiences, current as well as past, we all learn, we all grow from that. And of course, if you have, d- like me and Jenny, been on a journey of moving from fear to freedom, what have you learned along the journey? So please share your comments below. Before we get off, I'll do my best to go over into the group and check it out, because we're on Zoom here and it's a little tricky to
Mhm.
do that navigating, but we will. And but right now, what I want to do, Jenny, is have us talk about, if someone is experiencing more fear than freedom, let's talk about what can we do? What can a person do? Um, the other thought that's coming up is, should we talk about why pursue more freedom, or is that just intrinsic? Do you think everybody just is sitting there going, God, I don't want to feel stuck, or I don't want to feel trapped, or I don't want to feel this discomfort. I just want to feel free. Do we need to talk more about why anybody would want to?
Probably not, but people may use a different word for it than freedom. It
Hmm.
could be, they could use another word that means something to them. That would be the same kind of thing. Maybe somebody wants to feel more in charge of their life. Then they may use just different words, or feel like they have lots of options, or things like that. They may not use the freedom word. I think freedom is just a really charged word for me. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that I never felt like I had any until probably my early 30s, that I really had true freedom in the way that I would start to define it, you know.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, so let's talk about if someone is sitting there feeling a lack of freedom, whatever their words are, what can a person do?
Well, the reason fear has so much power over us, I think, is because intrinsically we have this ancestral stuff about fear, but we have this idea that we're not going to be okay. I think that's the bottom line. When we're in fear, we're not going to be okay. And you've heard the whole idea of the fight or flight thing, and how our ancestors, our cave dwelling ancestors, needed that to stay alive. They needed to run when the woolly mammoth came, and they needed the adrenaline. And we don't need that anymore for the most part. And since we don't need it as much, we still use it as much. We don't always have it when we need it for the real things. So when we're in fear, we're really pumped full of adrenaline. We're thinking that things aren't okay. We're making up all kinds of stories about, I call this awfulizing. We start making up stories about how bad it's going to get, or even making up stories about how the fear is real and why I should fear this and why I shouldn't fear this. So I think we first have to look at if we can kind of tell logically where the fear came from. Like I said, I don't think we have to know, but we could step back and the question I like to ask myself is, what do I know for sure? What are the facts here? So if I'm making up a story, let's say I called you, Kathryn. I had something I really need to talk to you about, and you ignored my phone call, and you didn't call me back, and it was 24 hours later. I might start going over in my head, go, oh my gosh, is Kathryn mad at me for some reason? What was our last interaction like? Did I say anything that might have, I could start making up stories about why you're not calling me back. And I can go into fear about, did I do something? Did I not? Is Kathryn still my friend? Making up all kinds of stuff. When if I step back and say, what do I know for sure? All I know for sure is I left you a phone message. I don't even know if you got it. So we can start to gauge the level of fear, because I think sometimes we waste a whole lot of fear energy on stuff that really does not matter, or that we've made up stories about with no basis in fact. So that's one place to start, to just check in and say, what are the facts here? What do I know for sure? And we can do that because in that moment that I'm fearful, I don't even have a sense of feeling free enough to pick up the phone and call you and ask you if everything's okay.
Right.
Because I'm making up the stories, So to me, a sense of freedom in that situation is, oh, Kathryn hasn't called me back yet. That's not like Kathryn. I wonder if something's going on. Let me check in with her.
Hmm.
And I also think it's a very adult way to be in relationship, but we can't adult if we're fearful. And, the brain is always looking for, where have I seen this before? And so if I've got a history of somebody doing that to me, my brain, if I'm not paying attention, could make it up and make it more important than it is. So that's one way we can start to look at it a bit differently.
Well, it's interesting because as you were talking, I was aware that at least in this example, it has to do with relationships, and that the examples you've been using have to do with interaction with people. So how free do you feel within your relationships?
Mhm.
And there are people in my life who don't appear free because in their relationships, because they would say the same thing. It's like that habit of saying, hi, how are you? And to actually break that habit is another interesting, like a practice somebody could take on if they want to feel more free in their interactions. Look at the habits that you've got that you do because you're supposed to,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
whatever it is, like, "Hi, how are you?" And then I'm thinking, and I'm still going back to that experience I had in that workshop about feeling trapped and going, I don't think that had to do with relationships. I think that had to do with time and how I was spending my time. And that I don't want to feel trapped in how, and I am continuing to be on this journey of uncovering how can I be with how I spend my time so I feel free and
Mhm.
feel great. And I go into fear around, but I should spend my time this way because this way is how I'm going to make the money, which of course goes into survival, goes to survival. This is interesting to me now because if I can recognize that that's true, then my questions to myself about how I spend my time and how I structure my business and what I do can come from that conscious place. Just
Mhm.
like you talked about the conscious place of reaching out to me in this example. By the way, I never ignore Jenny's phone calls, but if I did, it would be because I just didn't see it and something was going on. Because I love Jenny. I love you, Jenny. So anyway, I love this. So I'm just going to say, if you feel trapped in anything in your life, or if you feel fear in any area, put it another way. What area, in what way do you not feel free? Answer that question, anybody who's listening now, even if you've been on the journey like Jenny and I. So Jenny, is there any area that you currently still don't feel completely 100% free? Let's see if we can.
Yeah, yeah, I would be lying if I said no. I figured it all out. But when you talked about, the work thing, the business thing, or the whatever, when you think about people staying in dead end jobs or they want to start a business, but they stay here because they're fearful of the loss of income, they're fearful of what people will say, they're fearful of can they make a go of it. And I never really had I didn't have that fear at all. When it was time for me to go, I went because I planned it out and I knew exactly why I was leaving. The fear that still comes up for me a little bit, or this, it's not really a fear, but it's a lack of, it is a it is a fear, but it's more of a concern now because it's a lower level kind of thing, is I don't want to get so bogged down in stuff that I don't enjoy the freedom of working from home, the freedom of being able to take a walk when I can, to, have breakfast with my husband, to go to the movies in the afternoon when we start going to the movies again. So I have this thing, and I will sometimes start to get a little panicky about, oh God, my plate's getting too full again, because I've been with this virtual assistant, things have been, and I can go into that panic a little bit of, oh no, I don't want to, because I've had a taste of it now and I really like it. And I used to fear, if I this was an interesting fear when I first started, this business, and I had all these numbers of, if I get this many people who do this and I can make this much money, oh my gosh. And one day I went, oh, but I would have to actually have an office and go into it every day if I have this many people, and I went, I don't want that. I don't care how much money I'm making. I will never go work in an office again, even if it's my office. So, but I also know that that was slowing me down. That unconscious fear of having to do the status quo again was kind of slowing me down. So I think if we can look at freedom as an energy and an emotion, just like we do fear, that we can start to see what it feels like, you know, and like anything, until the feeling of freedom is better than the fallback position of fear, we probably won't shift anything. We have to get really clear on what that freedom looks like. Where's it missing in my life? How can I get more of it? We have to flip everything on its end.
Mhm.
It can just, how can I get more of that sense of freedom? Because I do know, and I may have said this already, but if we don't look at that, we will get it somehow.
Mhm.
And it could be in really destructive ways.
Right. So I wanted to come back to that because that's what's showing up in my head. Like I really I want to ask myself this, keep asking myself, and for the next week or two at least have a filter, like a mindfulness filter of noticing, where am I not feeling freedom?
Mhm.
What ways am I not feeling freedom? And not the bad freedom, not the freedom of, oh, what the heck, I'll just watch another couple hours on Netflix because I can, which is, I mean, there's nothing wrong with watching some Netflix or some whatever Prime and relaxing. There's nothing wrong with that. But if we're doing it from that place that you talked about earlier, which is, I'm not going to work. I am free to go do whatever I want to do. So I'm going to do whatever I want. Is that true freedom? So whether it's something like that, or if there's any area, I'm going to look in my life. Is there any area where I feel not free? Do I feel not free to speak? Do I feel scared about a response? And so about something could happen. So I don't feel free for that true freedom of acting from conscious love. I'll put in the love word there, consciousness and love, because that's where we are in true freedom when we're coming from that spaciousness place. I think. Does that feel true?
Yeah. And let me just add that when we're in that space, not everybody really craves freedom in the same way. There might be a bigger need that some people have than freedom. But if I need it so bad because I never had a sense of it, and when I got it, that feels, another example, I never drank anything in high school. I never did anything really very wrong in high school because my mother was always paying attention. And in a small community, she would have found out before I even got home. My first weekend at college, I went bonkers because I had freedom for the first time, but nobody had given me an opportunity to try it out first in a safe environment. And so we can jump from this to like total freedom and just kind of mess things up. But here's how convoluted and illogical it can look sometimes. I know that there are certain things I need to do for my business to make things happen. And if I'm feeling like, oh, nothing's working, I'm in this fearful place of, oh, what if I do that and nobody shows up and I'm blah, 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 then I can have this conversation with myself that says, you can't make me do that. It's like the little defiant little girl going, no, I'm not doing that, even though my conscious adult brain knows it's good for me and it's what I need to be doing. Mm-hmm. I can have a freedom fight within my own head with myself. Mm. That's how insidious it can be. And until you really examine that, you don't even know which one is the freedom that you're craving, like which is the right freedom for me. I know because I did a lot of the not so good freedom for me stuff back in the day. But I think if we can keep the emotional piece there, that it's a feeling, because those definitions I looked up, they were all about somebody else imprisoning us.
Oh, free from jail or something like that.
If we can see it, that it's something that we've mostly done to ourselves, that's a choice. Yeah.
That's interesting, because I would say that the trapped feeling I had was, in retrospect, internalized what other people had done to me. Mm-hmm. I took on my mother's message of how I should be in the world. So then it was then mine to be nice, to say, hi, how are you? Or whatever it is, to write Christmas cards. I mean, years ago, I got free from that. Thank goodness. And
interesting. I had that same thing about cards. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just little things that don't really matter in the big picture, but yet they cause stress and this feeling of just, not doing it the way I want to be doing it. It doesn't feel right. Mm-hmm. That's the main thing.
Mm-hmm. Right. So that's another little tiny place to be looking at. If you feel trapped, if you feel stuck, if you feel not free about any kind of behavior, you can look at that and put that in the potentially fear place. But let me look over in our group and see if anybody said anything. And if so, I want to make a note of it. Let's see here. Okay, Maria Guadalupe. I don't know how to say her last name.
Guadalupe.
Say it again.
Guadalupe.
But what's the next one?
Oh, that name. Apapacho, I think, is what she says. I don't, that's not, that's her business name. So I don't use that one as much, but yeah.
She said, hola, ladies, listening to you. So glad you're here, Maria. All right. Well, so And so anyone who is watching this now or watching the replay, we would love to hear your thoughts about anything that we've said. Where are you feeling fear? Where are you not feeling freedom? Maybe where you have started to experience freedom, or what is freedom like for you? And I- we all learn when we all share these things. So we'll check in later. Is there anything else, Ginny, that you want to say about this?
Yeah, the good news about this is a lot of it comes from the outside and then we take it on. But the good news is since we took it on, we can release it. There's nobody in there like making us hold on to it. And it's helpful to know what it is. But I think there's a tendency with some to blame outside circumstances. Well, if this were just different, I would be able to do this.
If I had more money, I would be free to do whatever. That's the biggest one, I think.
It's easy for her to say, somebody could be sitting there going, that's easy for Jenny to say. She didn't have kids, and that's a different thing. We adjust our lives based on where we are in our circumstances. It doesn't mean you all of a sudden, lock your kids in a room and go be free somewhere. It means that given the constraints that you've chosen for your life, if they are constrained, and they are constrained, they may not feel like constraints necessarily, but having children constrains you. You've got responsibilities, but you chose that, and so you're in it. How do you now navigate that and have a sense of freedom at the same time? Because we can never go to the solution piece unless we acknowledge what's wrong, right?
Yeah, there you go. There's wisdom from Ginny.
Yeah. I'd love to talk about public speaking fears.
Okay, all right. Let's talk about that.
Years ago, when I went to work for the seminar company and I went through their year-long training program, they said, and I never really looked to see where this research came from, but they said that public speaking was the #1 fear of American men and the #2 fear of American women. And so I was very curious, well, what's the #1 fear of American women? And they said death by fire, which I found interesting because I don't think I'd ever had that fear before of death by fire. But the little bottom line thing of that was, so if you really fear public speaking, you can always say, well, at least I'm not on fire, And so, I was thrown into this to do this, learn this stuff. I don't know if you've heard the story about in my corporate career when I had to go to New York City and be on a panel.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to do it, but my boss said it wasn't an option. It wasn't a request. And I would always say, I don't do that. I don't do public speaking. But I never stepped back and said, why not? Oh, it's not my thing. I would just always say, it's not my thing. I don't do that. And it wasn't until I had that experience in New York City that I think I started to open up a bit and ask questions like, what is it about? And out of the blue one day, this memory came back. And I think you may have heard it, but I'll go into the short version of it. About being about 7 years old. We went to church most Sundays. We'd skipped Palm Sunday, came in on Easter Sunday. My Sunday school was doing a little pageant. I didn't have a part since I wasn't there the Sunday before to get a part, but my teacher wanted to include me, so she gave me a poem to read. Well, I was a pretty precocious little kid and also a little competitive, and I didn't want to be the only child not reading or reading her part. They had all memorized their parts. I had a real photographic memory. I knew I could memorize this poem in the 10 or 15 minutes I had. I was so sure of myself that I left it with my mother and I went up to the front of the church. And you know what's next, right? In fact, when I do it now, I still can remember that anxiety just a little bit, but I'd forgotten all that. So I start my poem. It could have been this long. I don't remember, but somewhere in the middle of it, not only did I not know what I was going to say, I didn't even know where I was. It was like everything got kind of dark and I had this buzzing in my ears and somebody laughed in the congregation.
Oh, shoot.
I think they told my mother later they thought it was cute.
Oh, yeah.
I bolted. I ran out down the aisle and out the door and flung myself under a weeping willow tree and I sobbed. And Easter Sunday in a Methodist church is packed, standing room only. So the church was packed. I'm humiliated. My mother came out and tried to console me and I was inconsolable. She went back in and just let me stay out there by myself. And people came out later and they were telling my parents, oh, it was just so cute. I was getting bored with the service and that was just so cute. And what I didn't remember was the feeling of humiliation.
Yeah.
But that feeling of humiliation had stayed with me unconsciously, connected to speaking.
Mhm.
And when I remembered that, and the other feeling was, or the other truth was that if I ever did speak, I would forget what I was going to say. And then I would be humiliated and people would laugh. And I even called my mother to say, am I making this? Did this happen? She goes, oh, yeah, it was pretty bad, you know.
Well,
And
that's good she remembered it.
yeah, and so there was this deep fear I had of speaking that was irrational. It had nothing to do with my current reality. That had I, and I don't think I would have had to have uncovered that necessarily to move on. I think something else would have just had to be more important. I wanted to really start to do this. But I remember that and it made such sense to me that I had carried that around for 30 some years and it was running the show.
Mhm.
And so much like, it's going to be your fault if I don't know that I consciously remembered that on a daily basis, but it was embedded in there. And so since that had been embedded in me by an experience I had, I could then shift it and say, well, you've done inner child work, I know, and one of the best ways to let that little girl be okay is to tell her that you got it now. I've got this now, so she didn't have to be worried anymore. And that's a whole other discussion for a whole other time. But it seemed irrational to me, but I didn't even think it was a problem because I so didn't want to do it. So it didn't matter. It was like, oh, no, I don't do that. It's just not my thing. I think that's a really good example, at least for my life. And also, what was behind me getting beyond that fear? What would I not be doing today
Mhm.
if I hadn't really tapped into it? And the desire to do what I'm doing was bigger than my fear
Mhm.
because I didn't just flip a switch and not be afraid anymore. But I thought, so what's the worst thing can happen? I'll forget what I'm going to say and people will laugh. I'll deal with that,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
So
Mm. Mm. Such a powerful story. And I feel for that little Ginny.
I
And
know, in her little frilly dress and her little umbrella purse and her little bonnet.
oh,
And isn't it great that it happened because it makes a great story because it illustrates so many things. And I love that I get to tell that story because it doesn't have a charge for me at all.
mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
Mm.
Oh, I remembered something the other day that Jerry Seinfeld had said one time that more people would rather be in the casket than actually deliver the eulogy as far as speaking goes. Yeah, I just think
Yeah,
pretty
it's
aside here.
interesting.
Mm-hmm.
It is. As a person who goes to Toastmasters and is part of the On Purpose Woman Global community, where you constantly give us opportunities to speak, it just surprises me. I feel like I'm more and more surrounded by people who are stepping up and speaking. But yeah, I think that it's hard for people. It's a big fear. And if it's stopping someone from doing what they're here to do,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
that if that desire to do what you're here to do gets bigger than that fear, then you'll do something about it. So, yeah. Wow. Well, lots of really great stuff. I think it's probably about time for us to wrap up, Jenny. Is there anything else that you want to say about freedom or fear? You get to choose.
Yeah, I think the thing that bridges us from fear to freedom is courage.
Mm.
Have the courage to actually do what we maybe don't want to do, but to see on the other side of what might be possible if we do it. And there's an energy around fear that is very debilitating, is very low vibration, and there's an energy of courage that is expansive. And, courage isn't the absence of fear, it's having the courage to take a step anyway. The fear could still be there, but it won't stop you from taking that next step. So I think we can take little courageous steps. We don't have to do the whole bound at one time. We can take little courageous steps to move forward with that one thing that we think we want and it isn't happening. There's probably some fear energy behind it.
Mm. Mm. I love courage. Thank you for that. And I commit to paying attention to any place where I am feeling not free.
Mhm.
Any place where I experience where I'm not free. For the next couple of weeks, I'm going to have that be on my filter and see if what kind of fear might be keeping me there. So, yeah. All right, my friends. Well, let's just check one more time, see if anybody else had anything to say before we wrap this up. If I can find it. Where did you go? Conversation. It's for some reason not showing up here. Hold on, everybody. Give me a second. And then we're going to wrap up. There we go. Okay. So Maria is still our only comment. If you are watching this in the replay or you're still with us live, please share your thoughts about this. We do want to hear these Real Women, Real Purpose talk shows are for us, not me and Ginny, but all of us women. So be part of the conversation. And whether you joined us live here in the group, for the replay in the group, or for the replay in the YouTube, on YouTube, because that's where this is going to go, thank you for being here. Next Tuesday, well, in 2 weeks, a week and a half, on April 27th, Ginny is going to be back in the On Purpose Women Global Community. She's going to be interviewing Serena McIntyre. Is that how you say your name? About wellness. It's a journey, not a race. So that sounds interesting. And we will be posting a list of all the upcoming Real Women, Real Purpose talk show topics in the soon to be published May-June issue of the On Purpose Woman magazine. That will come out May 1st, and you can look for the upcoming topics there. To check out the current issue of the On Purpose Woman magazine, both to see what topics we've already covered, as well as to read all the great articles, go to onpurposewomanmagazine.com, onpurposewomanmagazine.com. And while you're there, check out the entire website. Jenny's got a whole new, beautiful On Purpose Woman Global Community website. So you'll be able to look around and see what you can do. And we have great meetings. If you haven't joined us for one of our online on Zoom meetings, please check it out. We got lots of them while we're still at home. And we will continue to have lots of them, but there'll be some in person as soon as that can happen. All right. We are going to I will put this interview up on YouTube in the next 48 hours. In the meantime, go over to YouTube and subscribe. Go to On Purpose Woman Global Community and go to our channel. You can see all the wonderful replays. You can subscribe. So when this comes up, you'll be able to see the replay. And when we upload any of these Real Women, Real Purpose talk shows, you'll get notified about that. And share them with your friends. All right, everybody. We'll see y'all next time. Bye, everybody.